In several decades covering the broadcast industry, I've written many stories about technology changes spurred by government spectrum policy. But only one of them, the U.S.'s transition from analog to digital television, involved broadcasters actually getting more spectrum for their operations. Since then, most policy-related stories I've covered have to do with spectrum being taken away from broadcasters, usually to be auctioned off to wireless operators. C-band satellite spectrum, long used to deliver programming to local stations and cable headends, is the latest example. Less than 3 years ago, broadcast and cable networks worked with satellite operators and technology vendors to vacate 300 megahertz of C-band satellite spectrum so it could be repurposed for 5G wireless applications. This C-band repack, as it was called, was accomplished by the launch of new satellites and the implementation of advanced encoding and modulation technology, which allowed networks to deliver far more program services per transponder than they had supported previously. Now, as per the One Big Beautiful Bill passed by Congress last year, the FCC is due to auction more C-band spectrum by July 2027, with at least 100 megahertz of upper C-band spectrum and perhaps as much as 180 going to wireless operators for 5G and 6G services. Today, our panel of experts will discuss the implications of that move for the television industry. And joining me today are Malik Khan, Executive Chairman and co-founder of LTN, Del Parks, President of Technology, Sinclair Broadcast Group, Paul Spinelli, Assistant VP of Corporate Engineering, Sinclair Broadcast Group, and Rick Young, SVP, Head of Global Products, LTN. I'd like to start with Del. What challenge does the further loss of C-band satellite capacity pose for broadcast and cable networks, local stations and cable headends? And how is this situation different from the initial C-band repack that was completed in 2023?
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Glenn. You know, it's interesting. You know, as you were doing the intro, it's like what the Lord giveth, the Lord taketh away, right? And the Lord in this case is the government. And it occurs to me, and I think we should make sure we all understand. Once the government auctions off spectrum, it's not public spectrum anymore. And so it's, you know, it's I call it equivalent to eating your seed corn. So look, it's a problem, and you know, there's a group called Spectrum Alliance that is focused on trying to solve this problem. And it really boils this problem of, again, continued loss of C-band. So you have to understand how satellite works and how broadcast works. Not everybody does. I would venture to say not everybody, even in Washington, understands how it works. But it's a very efficient way of delivering content. So just think about how you get your Sunday afternoon football game on CBS or Fox or in the evening on NBC. That's delivered via C-band. C-band it occupies part of the spectrum that has unique characteristics in as much as it's not subject to rain fade, and it has a broader footprint in terms of its coverage of the U.S. So one satellite can cover the entire U.S. with an acceptable receivable signal on a dish that is not like gigantic. So it's a very efficient way of delivering content to many endpoints. And those endpoints in our case are TV stations. And in the case of a lot of the networks, it's their cable programming that gets delivered via C-band. And so, having said that, you have to set the stage for what it is, how we operate today, and how we've operated for I think we bought our first satellite dish, I think, in 1985, 1986. And that was a that was a big deal because before satellite, I guess you could call that BS. Before satellite, you would have AT&T long lines. You would have physical cables coming to your TV station, and that carried your network signals. And so you can imagine how more efficient satellite delivery was. So having said all that, now in the big beautiful bill, the government's going to auction off probably 100 megahertz, we think. And that really just kind of pulls the rug out from underneath satellite distribution. And so it's very concerning to the networks and should be very concerning to cable operators and certainly concerning to TV stations. So that kind of sets the stage. Now, your second question, I think, was?
Yeah, well, it has some implications for contribution too. We can talk about that a little bit later. I'd like to turn to Malik. Can you explain the basic technology behind LTN's IP network and why you think IP terrestrial is the best solution to the C-band squeeze?
The value of that spectrum is just so much more in the cellular world. Honestly, it's almost a 10-to-1 ratio in terms of dollars that we can get for that spectrum. And that's a driver. That really drove a lot of this decision and why I think it happened the way it did and why it may be a lot more than 100. It could end up being 180 megahertz, which is the remaining spectrum. Now, we founded LTN in the 2008, 2009 timeframe and went commercial in 2010. But we built it as a purpose-built video network running over IP with a mission of someday replacing satellite. That actually was our business plan. And our reasoning was not based on FCC auctioning it off. Our reasoning was that you're going to need a lot more capacity than satellites can provide. There's going to be all kinds of digital platforms, all kinds of new ways of delivering product, and satellite was going to be out of capacity at some point. So the way we built our network, there are 4 or 5 characteristics that are really important, I think, to the industry. The first is that it is a purpose-built network for IP video, audio, and metadata. It does proprietary routing to be able to deliver 6 nines availability within 200 milliseconds anywhere in the world. And that you cannot do with any standard internet routing technology. So we had to go build this network pretty much to service the whole globe. The second is it's natively multicast, which means that by design, it was built as a one-to-many technology. It's not so easy to take internet, which is unicast by its architecture, and have it do broadcasting. So that was a lot of innovation in that. And then really the main thing I will say is that over the past 4 years, maybe, Rick, 3-4 years, we have gathered so much experience at taking things off satellite and putting them on the IP network. Tennis Channel is one of them. MSG is another one. Masson is another one. Univision is now on IP. There's about 10 or 11 major media companies that have already made that transition, well before the FCC ever And they did it because they needed to service an ever-growing market with ever more channels, and they ran into capacity limitations. And, oh, by the way, the final piece of it was we saved 60%, I think, for you guys. And that's about, I would say 40 to 60% on average is the savings to go from satellite to LTN. And so it's capacity unlimited, where satellite is very limited. It has reach that is global. We're now in almost every station. We're in 1,400 stations across the country. And by the end of this summer, we think we'll be at 1,700. We are in almost all cable head ends already. And by the end of this year, we will be in every cable head end. So we're building something that has enormous reach, great capacity, as close to satellite, C-band satellite performance as anything else that's out there. And the whole thing is managed by LTN. So that's really, I would say those are the main items.
Okay, thanks. By the way, can everyone hear our panelists just fine? I don't have a good sense of it here at the podium myself. I do want to turn back to Dell for a second, just to give people a sense of everything that C-band's used for today, and what will have to be replaced in equivalent functionality. Can you talk about how you use C-band for contribution as well in the industry in general, particularly as it relates to live events?
Yeah, I think C-band is still used for uplinks for major sporting events, and that's of particular value because when you're watching the Super Bowl, you can't afford an outage, and so the program originators will go to great expense and great care to ensure that these high-value, highly viewed content gets distributed, and so that's the contribution piece of it. Even though that almost all major venues today have fiber, right? And in fact, all major stadiums actually have LTN because we've used it many, many times when we had the regional sports networks. So it's particularly when I was talking before, it's a really valuable asset for the networks, is what I was trying to say. The networks are really focused on C-band distribution, except for NBC, who went KU band, 30 years ago, 20 years ago, whatever. KU band's in a different spectrum and is subject to rain fade. And so this Spectrum Alliance is mostly the networks, represented by the networks, who are concerned about how they're now, with the loss of C-band, how they're going to distribute the networks and how they're going to do contribution and how they're going to do their distribution. And so that's really kind of the concern. Now, having said that, for us, I think Malik, when did we start being a customer, Sinclair? 2014?
7 years ago?
Oh, longer
No,
than that.
more than that.
2014, I think.
2014.
There you go. So
So we were a very, very early adopter of LTN. And so it was, our move on Tennis Channel in particular was based on, and Paul can explain that because he did the move. But I think that Malik makes a very good point. The landscape is changing, and the FCC will auction off the spectrum because Congress passed a law. That's pretty darn simple. You have no option. The only question is how much and when.
yeah.
And so I think those answers, that's kind of unanswered right now.
Well, thanks. As you mentioned, Sinclair already transitioned Tennis Channel to IP. Paul, can you talk about that process, walk us through that and going from traditional C-band satellite to terrestrial IP? I'm going to advance a slide here, I believe. Here we go.
We knew that there was going to be an auction, right? It was just a matter of when. We didn't know how much they were going to auction off. We now know it's going to be at least 100. And we said, look, we're losing economies of scale on satellite now, and we knew that we needed to get off. We also knew that our encoding infrastructure was relatively new, thanks to the first repack. We were already in a high-efficiency compression mode with HEVC. We had a fairly aggressive modulation scheme over satellite, and we knew that as we wanted to grow the Tennis Channel's brand, that we were going to have to be able to support higher resolution formats. So with Tennis Channel just having a single service going out to most of the major MVPDs, with T2 coming up now closely behind it, we wanted to make sure that we were prepared for the transition. So we took a number of our encoders that we had available. Tennis Channel is a full 2110 facility, and we made sure that not only did we deliver a better picture because we were no longer subject to the StatMux pool that you see in our satellite drawing there, we wanted to make sure that we were able to transition T2 to the MVPDs, as well as have the ability to go to 1080p or UHD if the business required it.
Okay.
And T2 is Tennis Channel 2.
And just for perspective of how much work the government's putting you through, this process, to get to here, you mentioned the updating your encoders. When did you do that? Updating the IRDs for the first repack?
Oh, this was about 5 or 6 years ago when the first repack kicked in. We bought thousands of IRDs. We were paired together with our sports networks at the time, and it was well over a year's process to dual illuminate on new spacecraft with new equipment, and then cut everybody over. And I believe we cut everybody over that year just prior to 4th of July.
Okay.
If I remember it right.
Okay. Well, I'm going to advance to the next slide and look at where you guys are at today, and maybe you can talk about that rollout.
Yeah, so we knew tennis was highly connected. We had 4 ISPs in the building. One of them is actually on our AVPN mesh cloud network, and we actually have co-located into several of the LTN data centers, so we knew at least on one of the 4 links, we were able to fully QoS it from Tennis Channel in Santa Monica to the LTN backbone. We also knew that of those 4 connections, 2 were coming in one side of the building and 2 were coming in another, so we had diverse pathways into the building. So we were fairly confident that it would take an act of God to lose all 4 ISPs into the facility. So we took special care to make sure that all 4 ISPs were available. And we have seen outages on 1 or 2 of the ISPs, and it seamlessly fails over. And once it's on the LTN backbone, we had full confidence that between their multi-vendor approach on the ISP side that it would get to the other end without issue.
Well, the other point, there are 2 points I want to add to what Paul said. It wasn't like we just discovered it again. We just discovered LTN. We've had years and years and years of service. All of our television stations since I think 2014 were connected on the LTN network, where we shared news content and video content between our stations. So, we felt very, very confident that if there was any weak link, it was outside the LTN network. And then the second point I wanted to make was cost. You might want to talk about cost.
Yeah, so to Dell's point, we have 4 networks that have been riding on the LTN backbone for 10 years now? More. And we have had no outages related to LTN. Now, there's always last mile and circumstances on the receive end, but we have had very few calls in the last 10 years that have caused us to be concerned on the transport and distribution of the four networks. Cost-wise, when you're looking at a network like Tennis Channel, it's 1-2 services at most. And when you start talking about satellite and the density you can get on satellite, all of a sudden, the economies of scale aren't in your favor. To be able to get the receive levels that you need at some of the head ends, you're talking about buying at least a half a transponder. And if you can't put a half a dozen services on it, it's really tough to start justifying the cost for that. And with our relationship, we decided that LTN would be the most economical and most reliable path forward.
What was the response from the cable affiliates in rolling out LTN and maybe installing new gateways at some of the smaller head ends? Can you talk about that? I mean, were they receptive to? I guess starting off, what was the broadband capability like at all these head ends where you needed to deliver your signal?
So let me start the conversation by 4 years ago. There was a lot of pushback in the IP domain.
Okay.
When we did the first repack. This go-around, most of the MVPDs were very receptive to the idea of taking an IP feed. All of these MVPDs are ISPs in their own right to customers serving their community, to businesses serving their communities. And where there wasn't an LTN gateway, we worked with the LTN project management team and their MVPDs to get those installed. And I think we did it in a pretty efficient manner. Most of these guys are pretty savvy when it comes to ISPs and connectivity and what is required. LTN has a simple form that you fill out. We check that form, ship the gateway out, check back with them in a week or so. And by and large, from not having any LTN install to being on the air, sometimes under 2 weeks. Generally a 2-week process between shipping and installing, so pretty quick, all things considered.
And this last conversion, you started it when, and when were you complete?
We transitioned everybody in about a 4 to 5 month span. We had some discussions early on and just planned that out before we actually started the rollout. I mean, Tennis has over 200 endpoints. There was a little bit more when we started, so we had to prune down the list. And know where we had installs and where we didn't. But once we said go, it was 4 to 5 months to completion. Now, like I said, we repurposed all of our IRDs and a lot of our encoding equipment, so that kept our capital cost fairly low and required a lot less shipping on our behalf. We didn't have as many logistics as we did the first time around.
Yeah, IRDs are the receiver at the cable head ends that actually receive the signal. Not everybody may not know what an IRD is.
Yeah. Integrated receiver decoder. Anyway, we've been talking about basically replacing functionality. I'd like to talk to Rick about maybe some potential improvements to the business, particularly for the broadcast networks, that they could gain with this move of going to IP.
Sure. I just one comment about sort of what I think we're hearing in this conversation, which is, and the folks at Sinclair with the Tennis Channel and all the broadcast stations are a perfect example, right? I don't think there is one solution that fits every use case for every media organization. These guys are a perfect example, right? Some products might continue on KU in the future with an IP backup. I could see that as a scenario. I could see some scenarios where IP is the primary and KU is the backup. And OU and event-based use cases, we talked a little bit about the venues, is a good example, right? Put it on IP as your primary, and for the big events, roll in a satellite truck. That makes a lot of sense.
I think all the networks are analyzing that today, right? What happens if?
Exactly, 100%. And so we've built the network, and this will segue to what your question was. We've built the network to fit into those use cases, meaning if you want to keep the existing systems that you have installed, conditional access, which is really basically saying what takers get what channel at what time, you can drop the network in the middle and continue to use those same systems, whether it's LTN or satellite or a hybrid scenario, both. Same thing on the IRD, which is the receive side gear. We can drop the network in the middle. But what is different with LTN, which is what the question is what's possible. What's possible is delivering more content at a higher quality. Satellite is a fixed capacity world, and so when you're leveraging IP, leveraging the internet, that isn't a fixed capacity. This whole auction is about providing more bandwidth to more people everywhere. And the terrestrial guys are all investing billions of dollars to put more internet connectivity everywhere. So the capabilities are around better content quality and also customizing content when and as it's being delivered to where it needs to go. And so what do I mean by that? I mean, we do projects with broadcast stations today. We do for one of the broadcast networks, one of the big four broadcast networks. We deliver all of the content from the stations to OTT platforms. But as it's leaving the station and heading to those OTT platforms, the station, depending on rights, can swap out sources. It can go from this source to this source at this time, or replace a piece of content or a program that isn't cleared in this for this streaming platform and replace it with another piece of content. All of that happens as it's traversing the network, which really sort of changes the game in terms of how you can deliver the right content to the right platform, the right content to the right user, the right content to the right region of the country. I mean, it just allows optionality that doesn't exist in a model where you put it up on satellite once and everybody gets the same thing. If you want another version, you got to buy another transponder, and the bandwidth just, at some point, you're going to run out of bandwidth. It's a fixed capacity world. IP is the opposite, and then it's up to Dell and Paul and team to come up with great ideas to deliver better content to their viewers. At that point, sort of, the opportunities are endless, and we hand the reins over to the content creators and say, go for it, we'll help you do it.
That's the beauty of IP.
Flexibility.
So we have a few minutes left. I wanted to pose this question to Malik. When do you expect the FCC to announce rules for this C-band auction process? Do you have a sense of that?
I don't have a great crystal ball on that one, because there's a lot of stakeholders. I spoke with 5 networks today, all of whom are pressing to get that same. Here's my best sense of what's going to happen. Sometime, as Dell said, somewhere around August or September of this year, I expect the FCC to make a ruling. Now, at that point, this becomes law, okay? And what the ruling will probably talk about is 3 things. Number one, it'll say, we're going to auction off this much of the spectrum. My expectation, based on conversations with everybody that I can talk to about this, is that the full 180 megahertz will be gone. But that'll be about August, September timeframe. The second thing they will announce is the time that they're going to give the industry. And the way they're going to do that is they're going to nominally say, the plan is for 5 years, let's say. I'm guessing. But let's say they say, we're going to let you have 5 years before you have to move away from satellite. Because at that point, July of 2027, there will be an auction. At that point, the spectrum is spoken for. When it's implemented, they'll give 4 years from then, or 5 years from now, they'll probably say, okay, in the next, that time period, you have to vacate. But then they're going to give an incentive to SES. There is now only SES.
And only one operator left.
There's only one operator left. And they're going to say to SES, if you can get this done in 3 years instead of 5, we're going to sweeten the pot with what your compensation is from the money that we get from the auction. So that's what they did last time, and basically the Intelsat and SES, who were different companies at that time, both met that deadline. Okay.
As Dell, what about reimbursement for broadcasters? The last C-band repack, government paid about $3 billion in relocation costs to cover new equipment, IRDs, filters for preventing interference with frequencies. Do you expect similar reimbursement by the government this time around?
That's a big question. We would think so, but nothing is certain. Nothing's certain. So it's what's going to be interesting is to see how much money is actually bid and how much spectrum the telecom networks actually are going to need. And I mean, we just had Charlie Ergen, who sat on his spectrum for years, and bought it, and somebody bought it from him, right? So again, I'll go back to my original statement where, once you auction off spectrum, it's not public spectrum anymore. So I think Charlie made out really well reselling his spectrum that he bought 12 years ago, whatever, something like that. So there are a lot of assumptions that were made, and right now I can't answer that question because everything is an assumption. They're not going to guarantee, say, $1 billion if they're only going to make $5 billion from the spectrum. See what I mean? So there's really no way, at least I don't think there's any way to tell and answer that question.
Honestly, I think the numbers that are being bandied about is about 80 billion for the spectrum and around 3 billion or so for compensation for people who are. Those are the numbers I've heard from various sources. Every one of the networks that I spoke to today has made the same pitch to Chairman Carr and the rest of the FCC that I made, which is last time around, you did not have an IP alternative. As Dell said, or Paul said, 5 years ago was a different world. But this time around, it has to be there because even the KU band provider says, I need an IP backup for rain fade. So the one thing I'm really hoping for, I've hoped before and my hopes have been dashed, but I'm really hoping that this time around there will be a very specific amount of money reserved for people moving to IP. And I think it will happen.
Okay, thanks. Well, it looks like our time has come short. I think that's a good note to close on. And I'd like to thank all my panelists for their time and thank the audience for your attention. Have a good afternoon.